Good morning. We began a new sermon series this month. Pastor Don is using Jesus Revolution. There was a film that was released earlier this year that played in a lot of the theaters around Easter under that name, Jesus Revolution. And the film takes its name from a book that was written about a spiritual revival that took place in the late 60s, early 70s. Much of it centered around the Southern California area. I have some information here that I've given to the people in the classroom, and I will post this. It'll be as a separate slide when you get the video, so that you'll be able to see this too. The writer said that what unfolds is a counterculture movement that becomes the greatest spiritual awakening in American history. I'm not sure that he hasn't taken some literary license there, but it was a movement. The events in the movie are all actual events. They just have been condensed down into a shorter format to have in the film there. And so I invite you, if you have the opportunity, to see that film as we move on in this sermon series. The Jesus Revolution, the whole ministry of Jesus Christ is and was a revolution, and still is a revolution. And Pastor Don is going to be looking at that over the next several weeks. Today, we're looking at a passage of Scripture from Matthew. The section is called the Sermon on the Mount. And the particular part that we're going to look at are the Beatitudes. So I wanted to begin by reading the scripture as we begin to talk about it. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up a mountain. He sat down, and his disciples came to him. He taught them, saying, "Happy are people who are hopeless, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Happy are people who grieve, because they will be made glad. Happy are people who are humble, because they will inherit the earth. Happy are people who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness, because they will be fed until they are full. Happy are people who show mercy, because they will receive mercy. Happy are people who have pure hearts, because they will see God. Happy are people who make peace, because they will be called God's children. Happy are people whose lives are harassed, because they are righteous, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Happy are you when people insult you and harass you and speak all kinds of bad and false things about you, all because of me. Be full of joy and be glad, because you have a great reward in heaven. In the same way, people harassed the prophets who came before you." Now, before we talk about the Beatitudes in particular, I wanted to talk about very quickly about the Gospel of Matthew. It's one of the three synoptic Gospels, and the word synoptic means to be seen together. And that is to say that the material that you find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke is the same material, generally in the same order. There is some material in one gospel that's not in the other two, and likewise in the other two, each has individual material that's not found in the others. However, when you look at them together, it becomes obvious that one of two things has occurred. Either all three of the gospel writers had the same source of material, and then they picked and chose as they were writing their gospels to come up with the gospel that we have, or one of the three gospels was the source for the other two. And most scholars today focus on, or come down on that last scenario, that the Gospel of Mark was the source of information for the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. And one of the points in their favor is that almost all of the Gospel of Mark is repeated almost word for word in either Matthew or Luke. That you'll find all of that material there. And that Mark is thought to be the recording of sermons that the Apostle Peter preached. Now, in this Sermon on the Mount, another way of looking at this would be could look at it as Apostleship 101. Because what Matthew has done in recording the Sermon on the Mount, which spans several chapters in the Gospel of Matthew, is to consolidate the teaching that Jesus taught during his ministry. He records it as all of one teaching session, but in all likelihood it did not happen in one setting, but happened over a period of 3 years of the ministry of Christ. And in the beginning here, it says, now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, he sat down, and his disciples came to him, and he taught them, saying. I think because of pictures that have been composed of this setting, that we have in our mind an image of Jesus sitting on the mountainside and this large crowd that is gathered around him. In all likelihood, much of the teaching that we have on the Sermon on the Mount did not happen that way. It says that he went up on the mountain when he saw the crowds. Now, a conclusion that you could draw from that is that he went up on the mountain to get away from the crowds, and that his disciples, he gathered them around in a more private, personal setting and teaching them. Now, not all of that's true, because you have some of the teaching that occurs that obviously did happen with the crowd. But I just wanted to point out to you that you have a compilation, condensation. Say that again.
Condensation.
My tongue doesn't want to say that this morning. Of the events of 3 years that are consolidated here into one area. Now we come to the Beatitudes. And the Common English Bible says, happy are. And in other translations, you will find the word blessed. Blessed are. Instead of happy are people who are hopeless, you would find blessed are people who are hopeless. Elizabeth Laycock, a Bible teacher, she taught at Hiwassee College in West Virginia, I believe, is someplace in southern West Virginia that the college is located. But she translated that, oh, the sheer joy are people who are hopeless. Oh, the sheer joy of people who grieve. And Barclay carries that on. He gets inside of that this is the a way of interpreting that the Beatitudes. I'm trying. My mind's not putting this together here. The Beatitudes were not something to adhere to. They were a statement of the reality of living as a follower of Christ. That you were not going to be somebody who was rich. As the first one starts out, happy are people who are hopeless. The other older translations say people who are poor. because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. As a follower of Christ, in general, you were, because of being a follower of Christ, you were not going to be rich and famous. So the Beatitudes become a statement of the reality of the present tense, not something that will happen to you, but of the reality of living as a follower of Christ. And we could spend much more time than we have here this morning getting inside of these Beatitudes. But I wanted to share with you, William Barclay does a good job of interpreting, getting inside of those and looking at the fact that a lot of the translations that we have were translations that were done from the Greek language. And the reality is that when Christ was teaching, he was teaching in Aramaic. And so the Aramaic, I mean, to have the Greek, somebody has had to interpret from the Aramaic into the Greek, and then we come from the Greek into the English, and we have all of this wordplay, where in the English language that there are frequently only one word to translate what in the Greek language would have been several words that we translate into that one word. And the same was true coming from the Aramaic into the Greek. They had that same problem in finding the right words to use. And so William Barclay has done some work with that. And I wanted to go back and to share the Beatitudes with you in the way that he has interpreted them by looking at the Greek language and comparing that with the Aramaic. And so we begin. Oh, the bliss of the man who has realized his own utter helplessness and who has put his whole trust in God, for thus alone he can render to God that perfect obedience which will make him a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. Now, that's a whole lot more verbiage than blessed are those that are poor. But you get the idea of the inadequacy of the English language there. And then he goes on, oh, the bliss of the man whose heart is broken for the world's suffering and for his own sin, for out of his sorrow he will find the joy of God. Oh, the bliss of the man who is always angry at the right time and never angry at the wrong time, who has every instinct and impulse and passion under control, because he himself is God-controlled, who has the humility to realize his own ignorance and his own weakness, for such a man is a king among men. Oh, the bliss of the man who longs for the total righteousness as a starving man longs for food, and a man perishing of thirst longs for water, for that man will be truly satisfied. Oh, the bliss of the man who gets right inside other people until he can see with their eyes, think with their thoughts, feel with their feelings, for he who does that will find others do the same for him, and will know that that is what God in Jesus Christ has done. Oh, the bliss of the man whose motives are absolutely pure, for that man will someday be able to seek God. Oh, the bliss of those who produce right relationships between man and man, for they are doing a godlike work.
It kind of sounds like at the beginning there, the ones that he's talking to at first are the ones you reach the lowest point in your life. And it's like you're giving up hope, and blessed if you get a handout of food or clothing or uplift of mental positive thinking. It's, the only way they can look is up, because they're down so low in their life at that time that they are blessed to have somebody help lift them up out of that hole, like our blessing box, wood ministry, teaching the kids or grief, having someone to talk to, it's an uplift because they're in at life at that time, they're at the lowest point. So they are blessed in order to have somebody to help bring out positive in the situation, I guess you call it.
And who is that somebody? Who are the Beatitudes focused to that somebody? I think you're right, but I just want you to carry that thought a little bit further. Who is that person that Jesus? Take
And
it,
the
take it a little
person
bit
that's
further.
Apostles.
No, take it back to the beginning. God,
God.
right.
But it also blesses the person that's doing the good, because later on it says the ones that get, the well-to-do, they can bless by giving to the people that need the help. So they're in return receiving blessing, even though they don't think they are, by doing good. You have so much you can give it away and say, oh, that don't bother me at all. Well, somebody else on the side says, oh man, he's all right. He helped somebody that really needs it.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way street, and both benefit from it. One probably seems like he benefits more than the other, but the other is benefiting also because it builds up his esteem also.
Right, but the heart of what Jesus is teaching here is that person who can help you do all of that is God.
God.
And we understand that in light of the resurrection and understanding of the Trinity, that a part of that is Jesus Christ. That's God's manifestation to us in human terms, for us to see that person. And that's what Jesus is teaching his disciples. Now, this was radical teaching. And the last two verses here talk about persecution. And that was coming at the Christians from two different forefronts. They were being made fun of and harassed by the Jewish religious leaders, and they were also being harassed and punished physically by the Roman government. So they had it coming from two sides there. And a point that I should have made there in the beginning is that Matthew's gospel is what some people refer to as the Jewish gospel. It is a gospel written to people who come from the Jewish heritage, the Jewish Christians, if you will, the Jewish culture. That's the background that they're coming from. And so there's a lot of interaction and relationship to things that they were taught in their as a Jew, and how that interacts with being a follower of Christ and being knowing God in a very personal way. As we go through the rest of this sermon series, we'll be looking at other ways that Jesus' teaching was radical, and that it was turning things upside down in the culture of that day. The Jesus Revolution, and that's captured in that film, you may not recognize a revolution there, but do you remember the term Jesus freaks? That comes out of this period of time, and these people who were being turned on to Christ out of, I think that I've not seen the film, but reading what I've read, it seems to have come out of what has been referred to as the hippie culture of that time, and that's where the Jesus freaks comes into that this idea that a follower of Christ was a revolution for people in that culture. And it still is today, I think, just as much as it was then, that as we turn on to Christ, that we become counterculture to the world that we're living in. Well, we'll see how Pastor Dawn continues to unpack this in our sermon later on this morning, and look forward to having you all there with us. And if you have the opportunity to view that film, I invite you to take that opportunity. And may God's blessings be upon you.